Every country on Earth carries debt, from the United States to the wealthiest economies across Europe and beyond. This video breaks down who actually holds that debt and how the system behind it really works. Every major economy today runs on borrowed money, with trillions owed across governments that continue to expand spending while relying on a system few people ever examine closely. The strange part is not the debt itself, but the structure behind it, because once you start tracing where that money comes from and where it goes, the answers stop being simple. To make sense of it, the story begins decades ago, when money stopped being tied to physical assets and shifted into something far more abstract, which meant value could now be created through financial systems rather than mined or stored. That shift changed everything. Modern money started being created primarily through debt, and at the center of that system sits the Federal Reserve, an institution that influences how money enters circulation and how economies expand. Governments don't simply create unlimited money for spending, and the process instead relies on borrowing through financial instruments known as bonds, which are essentially promises to repay over time with interest attached. These bonds move through a network of buyers that includes central banks, private investors, pension funds, and even other countries, which means debt circulates globally rather than staying contained within national borders. Large portions of U.S. debt, for example, are held by nations like China and Japan, creating a system where countries are financially linked in ways most people never see. That sounds straightforward at first, and it creates the impression that countries simply owe each other money, but the deeper layer changes the entire picture. Over time, central banks themselves began purchasing massive amounts of government debt, which meant the same system issuing the debt also started buying it back using newly created money. The result was a loop. Debt increased, new money entered circulation, and that same money helped absorb even more debt, reinforcing a cycle that appeared stable on the surface while quietly growing more complex underneath. Pressure on that system became impossible to ignore during moments like the 2008 financial crisis. When banks failed, markets froze, and confidence across the financial world collapsed almost overnight. The response did not involve reducing debt. Instead, trillions of dollars were created to stabilize the system, flowing into banks and markets to prevent total failure, which meant the cycle accelerated rather than stopped. What nobody expected was how normalized that response would become. Now the structure looks very different from what most people imagine. A significant share of global debt sits within central banks and institutions connected to the same economies that issued it, creating a closed loop where money circulates within the system that created it in the first place. That loop keeps functioning. The cost, however, doesn't disappear. It shows up quietly. Inflation reduces purchasing power, everyday expenses rise, and savings lose value over time, which shifts the burden away from institutions and toward individuals who feel it through their daily lives rather than seeing it directly. The system continues operating, but the impact moves outward. Today, global debt has reached levels never seen before, climbing higher with each cycle of borrowing and monetary expansion, while the same pattern continues repeating without interruption. Borrowing leads to more money creation, that money supports existing debt, and the system stabilizes itself again, which creates the illusion of control even as total debt grows larger. This pattern is not new. It has appeared in different forms throughout history, and each time it follows a similar path, expanding until pressure builds and forces a response that reshapes the system without fully resolving the underlying structure. The repetition stands out once you see it. So the question of who owns the world's debt doesn't have a single answer, because ownership is spread across governments, institutions, and central banks that are all connected within the same financial framework. What matters more is how that system functions and where the effects ultimately land. 3 points make this clear. Debt is not simply owed between countries, because central banks and financial institutions play a central role in holding and managing it. Money itself often comes into existence through debt creation, which means the system grows by expanding what it owes. The real impact doesn't appear immediately, and instead shows up over time through inflation, reduced savings power, and rising costs of living. That leads to a different question, one that matters more than ownership. Who actually pays for all of it? History shows that these systems do not vanish. They adapt, they expand, and they continue operating in new forms that look different but follow the same underlying structure. Understanding that pattern changes how you see everything around you. If you found this breakdown useful, Subscribe for more explanations that uncover how financial systems really work.